Hello, welcome. This is our online Carb Smart class. My name is Melissa. I'm Health Aware's registered dietitian and personal trainer. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we are talking about reading food labels, something that is very important if you are trying to be mindful of your carbs. So let's get started. Let me know if you have any questions, any comments. Let's do it. Trying to figure out nutritional information on labels and packages isn't always easy. The good news is we're here to help. I'm here to help. You're here to learn. Food labels are especially helpful, like I said, if you're trying to be conscious of your carb intake or watch your blood sugar. If you get tripped up on the food content claims, you're not alone. Fat-free versus low fat versus reduced fat and low cholesterol and reduced cholesterol. It's very confusing and it can be tough when you're trying to make the right choices. So we are going to look at a food label and talk through the different components. Here we go. Here's a food label, just a basic food label. You can see next to the number 1 spot there, the serving size. Start by looking there at the serving size, always at the top of the label. All of the information on the label is based on the serving size listed, in this case, 2/3 cup. If you eat more than 2/3 cup of this particular item, that means you'll be getting more calories, carbohydrates, etc., than what is listed on this label. You'll also notice that the label shows the number of servings per container. That's 8 servings per container in this example. Underneath, next to the number 2 in red, you'll see the amount per serving written in smaller font. The information on the label on the left side is, it tells you the total number of the different nutrients in one serving of the food, so amount per serving. Underneath that, still next to that red number 2, is the calories. Always on the new labels, it's in a bigger, bold font. The calories are always listed there at the top. Calories are a unit of energy. We think of them as the energy that our body consumes and uses to keep us functioning. So always calories are right there up at the top. An important thing, whether you're trying to watch your carbohydrate intake or not, calories are important. Underneath that, in the larger section, under the red, or next to the red number 3, is the fats. That's what comes next. Total fat tells you how much fat is in one serving of the food, total. When, in general, when it comes to fat, we want to try to replace the foods that are high in saturated fat and trans fat, which most foods shouldn't have trans fat these days. We want to replace those with foods that are rich in monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats to reduce your risk of heart disease, among other things. Sometimes the label will list out the different amounts of the mono and the polyunsaturated fats, but sometimes they won't. So in this example, it doesn't list out those individually, but sometimes there are separate lines for each of those. In general, we want to avoid the foods that have really high amounts of saturated fat or any trans fat. Next is the cholesterol. We actually don't need to consume any cholesterol in our diets because our bodies make cholesterol. There's no cholesterol found in plant-based foods, only in animal-based foods. Ideally, you want to consume less than 200 milligrams per day of cholesterol, less than that. Sodium is what comes next. Sodium is the sciencey term for salt. Salt doesn't affect blood sugar. However, excess dietary sodium can increase your risk of high blood pressure and heart disease. With some foods, you can actually taste how salty they are, like pickles or bacon, but there's also salt hiding in a lot of foods like salad dressings, lunch meats, canned soups, canned anything, and other types of packaged foods, bread even. Reading labels can help you find the hidden sources of sodium and compare the sodium amounts in different foods. Whether you have diabetes or not, 2,300 milligrams or less per day is the general recommendation for adults. However, if you do have high blood pressure, there's often a lower goal of sodium intake for the day. Next, we're getting into what we really want to talk about, right? The carbohydrates. Total carbohydrates are next. Total carbohydrate on the label includes all three types of carbohydrate. That would be sugar, starch, and fiber. It's important to use the total grams when counting carbs or choosing foods which to include if you're trying to be mindful of carbs or your blood sugar. Total grams of carbohydrate. Below the total carbohydrate line, you'll find a breakdown of the different types of carbohydrate in the food. So the first one is fiber, typically. Fiber is the part of plant foods that's not digested, or for some types only partially digested. Good sources of fiber would be beans, legumes, lentils, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. All of those are great sources. The amount of fiber you need does depend on your age and gender and maybe other health conditions, but most healthy adults need between 25 and 38 grams of fiber per day. 25 for women is the recommendation and 38 for men is the recommendation. Underneath that, you'll see total sugar, always a really important thing when we're talking about blood sugar management and carbohydrate management. A lot of people are very aware of sugar content. So one of the three types of carbohydrates in foods is sugar. As of, I believe it was January of this year, 2021, labels must include added sugar to help you know the difference between sugar that occurs naturally in a food, like fruit or yogurt, like dairy, plain dairy, and sugar that was added during processing, like in cookies, candy, soda, that sort of thing. Many labels have already made that change, though not all of them yet. As you often hear, we do want to keep our intake of added sugar to a minimum, 24 grams or less for women each day, and 36 grams or less for men each day. Sometimes on a label, you will see sugar alcohols listed. Sugar alcohols are a type of sugar substitute that have fewer calories per gram than sugars and starches. Sorbitol, xylitol, and mannitol, are examples of sugar alcohols. Essentially, anything that ends with that OL is a sugar alcohol. If a food contains sugar alcohols, it will be listed under that total carbohydrate heading as well. It's important to keep in mind that foods that do contain sugar alcohols are not necessarily low in carbohydrate or low in calories, or possibly even low in sugar, depending on the other ingredients. And just because a package says sugar-free on the outside does not mean that it's calorie-free or carbohydrate-free. Always check the label for the grams of total carbohydrate and calories and sugar. I generally recommend staying away from a lot of sugar alcohols though, because they can cause GI upset for many people. The list of ingredients is what's typically underneath or next to a food label or the nutrition facts label. So this is an example of one. I don't even know, what is this, macaroni and cheese maybe? So ingredient lists can be helpful, a very helpful tool. Ingredients are listed in order by weight, with the first ingredient being the highest amount in the food. Knowing the ingredients in your food is very useful in making healthy choices and knowing how to do things like increase your fiber intake, decrease your sugar intake, any kinds of things health related you want to do, you should be reading the nutrition label and the ingredients list. Underneath that, or kind of in between, I guess I should say, we can go back to this first label. You'll see at the very bottom, not yet at all. On the right side, my apologies, we're kind of skipping number 4 on this list here, but number 5, down at the bottom, you see the percentage, percentage daily values, and you'll see on the right side of this list, the percentage of daily values, or the percent DV, sometimes written. The percent daily values for each of the nutrients are found in that right column. This column, the percentages tell you what percent of each nutrient the food provides based on a 2,000 calorie diet. That's kind of what that little asterisk at the very bottom of the label will say, based on a 2,000 calorie diet. The percentages are not necessarily applicable to everyone because everyone does not need to or does not eat a 2,000 calorie diet. So I take those percentages with a grain of salt. As a general rule, aim for less than 5% of the nutrients that you want to limit, maybe like sodium, saturated fat, cholesterol, and aim for 20% or more of the nutrients that you want to get more of, like fiber, vitamin D, calcium, iron. And those micronutrients, as they're called, the vitamins, minerals, that's what's listed in that number 4 section right there, which we didn't really talk about specifically. The next thing, which is not shown on this label, but net carbs. So net carbs and other nutrient claims is kind of what we're talking about. But first, net carbs. You've probably seen or heard of the term net carbs on food packages or books, audio type of things. Yeah. Many food companies do make claims about the amount of carbohydrate in their products. However, net carbs doesn't have a legal definition from the FDA as of right now, and they're not used by the American Diabetes Association either. We always encourage you to look at the total carbohydrate on the nutrition label first. That's where you want to be looking if you're trying to manage your carbohydrate intake. And of course, if you do have diabetes, checking your blood sugar can help you figure out how specific carbs affect you. Net carbs isn't the only confusing nutrition claim that you'll find on food packages though. For example, have you ever wondered what the difference is between fat-free, saturated fat-free, low fat, reduced fat, less fat? The government has defined some of these claims, and that can be used on food packaging. So we're going to go through just a few of them. There's quite a few. So I'm not going to necessarily read through all of them, but I do have them all listed here. So calories is the first example. Calorie free can have up to 5 calories per serving. Low calorie can have up to 40 calories per serving. Okay. The fat category. So some of the important ones, the saturated fat one, saturated fat free, it can actually have up to a 0.5 gram of saturated fat, and the same is for trans fat. And trans fats are not something we want to eat anything of at all. So even a 0.5 gram of trans fat isn't something that we want to have. But a package can still say it does not contain trans fat if it has less than a 0.5 gram. Reduced fat or less fat means that at least 25%, or the item has at least 25% less than the regular version. So as you can imagine, there can be quite a bit of variety within that category. The same story for sodium, on reduced sodium or less sodium, and the same thing for cholesterol as well. They can say reduced sodium or reduced cholesterol, and that means that it has at least 25% less of those items than a regular version would. And you can see the low sodium, 140 milligrams or less of sodium is considered low sodium. So you might see that written on cans of tomatoes or cans of beans, things like that might say low sodium, and they will have 140 milligrams or less. This is the last kind of category of these. So sugars and fibers. Sugar-free means that a food has to have less than a 0.5 gram of sugar per serving, which is quite low. Reduced sugar, similar to the ones we just talked about. Reduced sugar means that the item must have at least 25% less sugar per serving than the regular version. Depending on what that is, that can still be a very high amount of sugar. Thinking about maybe soda or ice cream, they're still going to have probably quite a bit of sugar in them, even if they are reduced sugar. So that's why it's important to read the nutrition labels to find out how many grams of sugar or carbohydrate or whatever it is that you are actually going to eat with that item. Fiber is the last one. High fiber means that it has 5 grams or more per serving. If you see that written on a package, high fiber, it is supposed to have 5 grams or more per serving. And good fiber would be 2.5 up to 5 grams per serving. So reading food labels is an important part of healthy eating, especially if you're trying to be conscious of your carbohydrate intake or you're trying to manage your blood sugar, both of which are a lot harder during the holidays. There's a lot more carbohydrate foods available for us and a lot more things, sweets, that are going to be affecting blood sugar. If you have any questions about this topic, please let me know. I'm happy to help you out so you can feel confident in understanding food food labels. That's all I've got for you today. Short and sweet, no pun intended. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.